Everyone, and welcome to the April meeting and program of the San Fernando Valley Unit of the League of Women Voters of Greater Los Angeles. I'm Joyce Batten, acting today as chair of the unit. For those of you in our audience who may be new to the League, we are a nonpartisan political organization dating back over 100 years, when in 1920, the 19th Amendment of the Constitution was ratified and women won the right to vote. Our San Fernando Valley unit has for several years now presented monthly programs on subjects of interest not only to League members, but hopefully to the public as well. And I'm going to give you an advance notice of our May program, which will be UCLA School of Law Center on Reproduction, Health, Law, and Policy. But please note that our May program will not be on our usual Thursday afternoon, but on a Monday, May 15th, but at our usual 12:30 time. All right, today we're talking about water. And Ann Rushton will introduce our speaker. Ann?
Okay, thank you. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce our guest speaker today. Mr. Joe Yun is the Executive Officer of the California Water Commission. And just a bit of a sidelight. California's had an extended drought and we have had an exceptionally wet winter. And we've recently learned an entirely new vocabulary, at least for some of us, with terms like atmospheric rivers and bomb cyclones. And so we know that planning for both floods and droughts are certainly a major challenge. And so we're very glad to be able to learn more about California's management of its water resources. Mr. Joe Yun is a graduate of UC Davis, where he earned a bachelor's degree in science and environmental technology. And most recently, he has served as the program manager for the Commission's the Commission's Water Storage Investment Program. And prior to joining the Water Commission, he served as the chief of the planning grant section in the financial assistance branch of Department of Water Resources Division of the Integrated Regional Water Management. So he has managed multidisciplinary teams to implement various water management grant programs that are funded by general obligation bonds. So before joining the DWP, he worked for private environmental consulting clients on issues dealing with surface water, groundwater, and storm water quality projects, and remedial investigations and site remediation. So he's got lots of experience in lots of different areas. Anyway, please take it away, Mr. Yun.
Thanks, Ann. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and pull up a slideshow. So hopefully you guys can see that now. That's going to take a little bit to load. So I'm going to go ahead and just greet you. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I was in Visalia a couple of days ago at the League of Women Voters meeting there, giving a similar slideshow. This one's slightly different. Today, I'm going to cover a little bit about the Water Commission because there is a lot of commissions and boards that deal with water within the state. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Water Commission so you're a little clear on that. I'm going to share with you some information on California's changing hydrology, that whole thing that we have lived through, as Ann said, drought and into flood now. And then I'm going to discuss some related program pieces that the Commission is working on, just to give you a sense of where some of this may go. And then I'm going to end with a legislative summary. I want to point out some legislation that is out there now that may be of interest to you. So hopefully this has had enough time to load. Let me see if I can get the slide to advance. Oh, not quite yet. Oh, there we go. We waited long enough. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Water Commission. The commission is made up of 9 governor-appointed, governor-appointed commissioners, 2 for their knowledge of the environment and 7 for their general knowledge of water. The commission is non-regulatory by nature, and we have found that using our public forum to explore water management issues from a broad perspective is something that we're pretty good at. And so that is something that the commission values and uses and has found to be useful in our work. And so this is our vision and mission statement. I'm going to take you to our strategic plan goals, and these goals, I think we're probably got another year or so under the current strategic plan. But in line with our vision and mission, the commission values its public forum. We have robust discussions around water management issues, and we advise DWR and other state agencies with that information. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. We do have the obligation to monitor and review the operation and construction of the state water project. And every year we write a report that goes to the legislature. We do act as DWR's public board. So we have the obligation to review and approve DWR regulations. So if DWR is writing any regulations, they have to come through us before they are enacted. We also have obligations to DWR if they are going to exercise their eminent domain powers. The commission is the public board that must find a resolution of necessity as part of that process. We have another statutory responsibility for carrying out Proposition 1 from 2014. That is our water storage investment program, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as I move forward. The commission also has some statutory authority around advocating for California flood projects with the federal government. That's old language in the statutes, but the commission wants to take some time to reevaluate and see if there is a need to reactivate our role in that world. There are plenty of agencies in the flood world now, which is different than when that legislation was written. So there may be no role for the commission, but that's another thing that the commission will probably pick up here in the next year or so to work on. Just to tell you a little bit about the commission meetings, we do meet monthly on the 3rd Wednesday of each month. Anybody looking at the calendar would say, oh, that was yesterday. And so yes, yesterday was our commission meeting for April. And I'm going to cover some information that we covered there that we daylighted yesterday. We do have hybrid meetings, so you can participate in person or via Zoom. If you want to actually make a comment, it's via Zoom. If you just want to watch the commission meeting, you are welcome to do so on a live stream through YouTube. Before I go on, that's enough about the commission. I think I want to move on to California's changing hydrology. Before I do that, I just want to mention a slight or make a distinction with the commission's work. The way the commission is configured and the work that we do is a little bit more longer term, looking at water management issues and solutions. That is different than any emergency actions or emergency powers. So the commission doesn't really work in that realm. And I just want to make that distinction because some of the drought work I'm talking about, it occurred during the drought, but we're trying to look at things more long-term. A lot of the emergency stuff done for drought is done through different folks within DWR. The same is true for flood. We don't really have a role in emergency flood actions that are occurring right now. I don't want to diminish that work, but I just want to let you know that there's a distinction when we talk about the commission. So California's changing hydrology. I borrowed some slides to talk about California precipitation and what's happening from Dr. John Abatsoglu, who works at UC Merced. He came to the commission in July of 2022, and he was on a panel where we were talking about droughts, past, present, and future. And so I just want to make sure you understand where that information is coming from. On this slide, the main point is, and I think everybody who lives in California probably knows this, but California has very volatile precipitation. We don't have, we're not good at having the same amount of precipitation every year. Sometimes it's very high, sometimes it's very low. And if you look at this graph, this was, again, something presented in 2022, but Dr. Abatsoglu did point out that the most recent 3 years are the 3 driest consecutive years that we have. I can move on. Okay, so looking at California's unique situation, if you start on the left of this slide, and you're looking at the number of days to get to half annual precipitation, and what you notice on that picture is simply a lot of orange, yellow, pink in California, which means that we get at least 50% of our precipitation in a very few number of days. It doesn't take many rainy days to get us some water. And then you move to the middle graph or the middle picture. And what you find in California is that it is really the 3 top events, the 3 biggest events of the year that give us most of our annual snowfall. So you can see all those blue dots kind of concentrated there around where Lake Tahoe would be. And you can see we get 60, 45, 38% from a very few number of storms. Typically, those are atmospheric rivers. And so if we don't get our 1 or 2 or 3 atmospheric rivers a year, that's the difference for us between what could be a normal year, a wet year, or a dry year. So it doesn't take too much. And in the last drought, the last few years, there were times when we maybe got 1 or we didn't get any. If you move to the frame on the right, the fraction of precipitation during atmospheric rivers, you can see that California is pretty much in that kind of orange, red, yellow band. So what that says to me, I think, is that we are just atmospheric river dependent. And it doesn't take a lot of atmospheric rivers to satisfy our need. So one thing that's changing in California hydrology and causing a change here is rising evaporative demand. And so as we warm in climate, what we're finding is that the atmosphere is getting thirstier. It's getting drier, it's getting thirstier. So Dr. Abatsoglu talked about this as another straw in a cup. And so in essence, what that means is as we warm, it takes more water to do what we used to be able to do. And that's because of this atmospheric demand. It means the soils are drier. It means the plants are drier. And it just takes more water to, let's say, water a farmer's field than it had in the past. So that is another draw or drain on what we think of as our water supply. Climate change is a drought magnifier. So drought does kind of exacerbate the drought. Climate change and the higher temperatures exacerbate the drought effects. And so on this slide, you're seeing on the left 2012 to 2014 drought rank. What we observe, and you can see most of the state is darker, more orangey, red, dark colors. And then without the warming trend, if you subtract out the warming trend, you can see what would happen. And there's a little more blue. It's not quite as severe. The dark red pieces are smaller. And I think Dr. Batsblue said that when we look at 2012, 2014, it's about 15% more acute with climate change. When we look at 2000 to 2021, and we look at drought rankings, on the left, you see the observed, on the right, you see the estimate with no climate change. And it's just less, right? You've got some areas that would not be in drought on the right that were in drought on the left. And the intensity of those droughts is less where you see them. As an example, increased evaporative demand is approximately 2 inches per year during our most recent drought. And that would equate to about 1 million acre feet of extra water demand just to irrigate cropland alone. So that's the kind of effect or a magnification we get from climate change. So in summary, as we talk about the changing hydrology in California, we can talk about getting hotter and drier, and we think we will have less snowfall, and it's hard to believe in this year, but we will have less snowfall overall, more evaporation, greater consumption of water by vegetation and soils, as I talked about that evaporative demand. There is an estimate out there that over the next 20 years, we could lose about 20% of what we consider our water supply today. I wanted to then talk a little bit more about our drought experience, our most recent drought experience, and talk a little bit about how that we experience it differently than we have droughts in the past. And so I pulled on some of the slides from Janine Jones, who is DWR's drought coordinator. And she gave a presentation to the commission in January, again on past and present droughts. Her talk was supposed to happen in July, and we couldn't get her in until January. You can imagine she's pretty busy. But from the most recent drought, we have record low deliveries from the federal and state water projects. We had in Southern California, large-scale urban water use restrictions. On the Colorado River basin, from the Colorado River, we had shortages. We had record low water elevations at Oroville, and we're not able to run the power plant there in 2021. In 2021, we had about 70% of statewide snowpack that year, and they had anticipated fairly good runoff. That runoff did not occur. It was more like the drought years of 2014, 2015, when you look at the runoff we got. And that's partly because of that evaporative demand, where the plants, the forests, the soils were so much drier than we understood, that when that snow melted, it just did not come down as runoff. We had groundwater impacts similar to the San Joaquin Valley that are now showing up in the Sacramento Valley. That is unusual. Typically in a drought, we in Sacramento Valley still have some water compared to the San Joaquin Valley. And that simply means that we're drier up here. It's harder to transfer shear water. Is there water to move around if we're all dry? I wanted to include this picture from Janine Jones's slideshow. I think this is Lake Mead. And so showing how dry Lake Mead is in this slide, since I have a pointer today, I think these are people, like right down here, there's like 2 little people. So you can see kind of the scale and how dry things are. Something that we used to be able to rely on in our droughts was having Colorado River water, and that simply is not the case at this point. This slide kind of summarizes some old and new, and I talked through most of the new slide, or the new side of this slide. The one thing I haven't mentioned here is, as a change in what we experience, is weather whiplash, which is what we experienced and lived through this year, this winter. So we went from the driest 3 years on record to one of the wettest. We didn't have our 2 or 3 atmospheric rivers. I think depending on who you read or listen to, it's somewhere between 12 and 30 atmospheric rivers, which is a lot of water coming through. April 3rd, 2023, that was the last snow survey, the most recent snow survey, I believe, is April 3rd. So at that point, statewide snow water equivalent is 237% of average. So we've got more water, snowpack holding a bunch of water than we normally do. And in the Southern Sierra, you're at 300%. And so that is a lot of snow. And of course, we've experiencing flooding from rain events this year. And now we are bracing for flooding from snow events. With that snowpack melts, Tulare Lake is already formed. And so we're going to get more flooding, I think, in that part of the state. That's my talk a little bit about what's changing in our hydrology, what's different. I want to touch on just 2 documents that you should be aware of. These are state level documents. And it's important that I mention these now, because as I talk about the commission's work in this realm, this is where the commission's work is going to come from. So in, I believe, January 2020, is that right? Let me check my notes. January 2020, that's right. The governor released the California Water Resilience Portfolio. This is essentially the governor's water plan for his administration. It's 142 actions directed to state agencies to improve water resilience, organized into 4 categories. I'm not going to get into too much of what those categories are, but the 4 on the screen. Building connections really refers to working with our infrastructure to make it more flexible and building connections between systems. Being prepared, I think, refers to helping and recognizing that regions must be prepared for the changing climate. And so that was back in 2020. As some of the reports and some of the papers were coming out about the evaporative demand, and you may have heard the term aridification, the drying of California, the governor put out in 2022, and I think this is August of 2022, he put out the water supply, California water supply strategy. And it's a roadmap to achieve key targets that we feel that California needs to meet to operate and make our water systems resilient in the face of this drying, hotter climate that is coming, or that is here. And so we're looking at having a recycling target of 800,000 acre feet by 2030, boosting annual groundwater recharge by 500,000 acre feet, expanding new water capture through urban stormwater capture and desalination to the tune of 250,000 acre feet by 2030, and looking at about 4 million acre feet of additional storage than what we have today. And so this document kind of lays out those targets. I was at a conference 2 weeks ago in Van Nuys, and one of the speakers used these as saying, these are the goals, this is the challenge, this is what, as water districts or water managers, that we need to start achieving. And I think that not only these goals, I think that we're probably looking at maybe doing more, but I think these are more realistic goals that the governor believes that we can meet. So I'm going to turn now to the California Water Commission and a couple of pieces of work that the commission has that relate to the water portfolio and the water supply strategy. So when we talk about more storage, the Water Commission does hold the Prop 1 Water Storage Investment Program. This was $2.7 billion to pay for the public benefits of water storage projects. Proposition 1 defines public benefit as those 5 public benefits on the screen. So there are 7 projects currently within the water storage investment program. If these are all built collectively, this is 2.77 million acre feet. We have 3 surface storage projects, sites, Los Vaqueros and Pacheco, and 4 groundwater related projects. They're either conjunctive use or groundwater storage projects, Harvest Water up in the Sacramento area, and then the Kern Fan, Willow Springs, and Chino, all in Southern California. The other piece of work that the commission has is related to the water resilience portfolio actions. We have been asked to work on 3 actions. We have completed our work on 2. We're in the middle of Action 26.3, which is develop strategies to protect communities and fish and fish and wildlife in the event of a drought lasting 6 years or more. So a little bit more about that item, because it is a major piece of work that the commission is working on right now. So we were asked by the secretaries of the California Natural Resources Agency, California Environmental Protection Agency, and California Department of Food and Ag to help them. They are the implementing agencies for this action, but they asked for our help and the use of our public forum to initiate this work and come up with some strategies to protect communities of fish and wildlife in the event of a long-term drought, to provide those strategies to them so as they think about policy and investments, they can look at those strategies and figure out what is best to implement. So that's how this is structured. So the commission's work was broken down into roughly three parts. We are right smack dab in the middle of our outreach part. We have done interviews with folks abroad in other countries, with folks in California, drought experts, state agencies, tribes, as well as nonprofits from all different folks, and also ag. So we've done a lot of homework and research on our own. We have convened a working group of experts to help staff come up with some what we're calling preliminary strategies that we will now start turning towards the public, and we're using them in workshops and gaining input through targeted outreach, and also helping with our commissioners, or allowing our commissioners to work with those strategies and start getting them into shape so we can move on to develop that white paper that will go to the secretaries of those agencies that requested our help. At yesterday's commission meeting, staff did daylight those preliminary strategies, so I have included that in what I'll cover today. Before I kind of go there, I talked about the work that the commission staff has done in terms of research, interviewing a whole lot of people about what we should be doing in a drought, how we prepare for long-term drought. We have enough connections and enough folks who wanted to work with us that the assistant executive officer, her name is Laura Jensen, who's the primary staff person I have working on this assignment, allowed her to get enough folks to write articles that turned into 2 editions of the American Water Resources Association Impact magazine. So Laura guest edited these 2 editions. The Water Resources Association was kind enough to allow the January-February edition to be open access. So you can go out to their website, you can ask for that or put that edition in your cart, and there is no charge for it. You do have to give them your email address and have an account with them, but it is free. The March-April issue was just released today. I think the commission has a digital coupon. We are happy to share that with anybody on our listserv who would like it. and you can get one free download of that edition as well. I think it's a good way to have some reference and have some articles about what people are doing out there in terms of solution and where we might need to head. So I offer that to you as a resource. In doing our work and talking with different countries who have experienced severe drought, and also working with folks in California, there are some overarching themes to this work. I just wanted to share that with you very quickly. One is to take bold action to improve water management. So really what that's talking about is to leverage the crisis at hand, the drought, when we actually wrote this, the drought, and make changes as you can. And we'll talk more about what some of that might look like. You need to work in the non-drought years to get ready for those drought years. If extended droughts are going to be part of our future, we can't just treat them as one-off events. We have to prepare and plan for that, more so than we do today. And then adapt to the new reality brought on by climate change. And we talked about what that looks like and what that feels like. And we all lived through that the last 4 years. Advance a portfolio approach to whole system solutions. We can no longer do one project in the lower part of a watershed and expect that to help us. I think we need to look at the system as a whole and work with the partners up in the watersheds down to the valley floor to understand what's happening and how to manage the water that may be coming down from the mountains. We need to ensure robust measurement and monitoring. We need to have good data that we can rely on and make management decisions, particularly in times when our water supplies are constrained, and so the public can be part of that solution. We need to get over the us versus them dichotomy. A lot of times in water work, there are different sides. I think when we talk about preparing for drought, an extended drought, it's about understanding that we all need to work together to figure out what to do and implement successful solutions. And we need to look at species in our environment, I think, slightly differently, and to think about how we manage that, and so that it can be incorporated into drought preparedness and response. So I told you that yesterday at the commission meeting, staff revealed the preliminary strategies, and I think we produced like 4 of them that the commission and through the workshops, the public can help shape these for our white paper, and we can pass on to the secretaries. And so I'm just going to run through these. My presentation here is not eloquent because I just threw them into the slideshow like at noon before I got on to come over to you. So really the first proposed strategy or concept is improve coordination and communication during drought and non-drought years. And part of this is the recognition, I think, that we do need to do some cultural shifts. Talking with other countries where they live in a much more arid state and have faced a severe drought, there is a general awareness, and I would say just a water revering culture. And I think that's different than what we see in California. And so this is really around what is the messaging, what is the information that we can put together, not only the state, but how can the state and locals work collaboratively? Because a lot of times the locals are the ones putting out the most detailed information for their area. But how do we put communication and messaging together that will help us all kind of understand what our water situation is, in the hopes that we will be a more water revering culture moving forward. Scaling up groundwater recharge. I think everybody probably has heard quite a bit about recharge in recent times. It is one of the hottest topics. The governor did release an executive order recently to help with recharge in the face of floodwaters coming down from snowpack. So we need to prepare for recharge. We need to identify areas where recharge is most beneficial, most and fastest. Identify folks that can help us in terms of landowners willing to use land to recharge water. And we need to promote recharge efforts. And so some of these, as I go through these, you'll hear them and they sound very general. So we need to reshape these. We need to make them sharper. And that's what the outreach is all about, and the workshops that we're planning coming up are going to be about. We want to provide incentives to spur recharge. And it's particularly in those places where it works best for in the environment and for people. And we also want to just be careful with those small under-resourced communities that in some cases are hit hardest by drought, and how can we position our recharge to help. One example of that is I think it's the Mid-Kauai Water District that is doing their recharge. They're actually purposefully recharging near one of the small communities to help that small community keep water levels in those shallow wells higher as they're near the area of recharge. So it's things like that that we need to think about. We need to streamline permitting to maximize groundwater recharge. We need a little clearer definition around flood triggers. What is the trigger that would allow us to streamline some of the permitting? And then I think there is a huge infrastructure. Infrastructure is another word you'll hear over and over again as you listen in the water world. We need to build and improve our infrastructure around groundwater recharge. How to get the water from either where it's coming down to the areas that we need for recharge, and how do we do all this stuff and get ready for these events like we had this winter. Reduce ecosystem impacts of drought. So this talks a lot about environmental watering plans, and that is a term that you may have heard if you follow the Public Policy Institute of California, PPIC. They've talked about this before. This is really modeled or something that they did in Australia, in Victoria, when they had their millennium drought. They really started to try to understand, how do we plan for and make sure that the environment has an amount of water that makes sense to keep the environmental ecological functions working. And so that's really what this piece is about. It would, I mean, there's a big lift here because this would change the way we manage species and look at species in terms of water. Concept 4 is to better position communities to respond to drought emergencies. So this one is around the small, rural, disadvantaged communities, and it comes from a community-based organization who was on the working group that we were on, that we formed. And in our talk about that, there is a lot of emergency actions that occur when a drought occurs. We are likely moving forward going to continue to have droughts, and this is around how we do what we do in emergency situations a little bit better. And so it does talk about having an emergency fund set aside, and also having, being able to run that through local operators, local agencies, local entities to best get the money on the ground and out to people who need it. So the working group had a lot of conversations on a lot of different subjects. The 4 that we presented, that I just presented to you, are the 4 that there was agreement across the board that these were things that should move forward. The commission continues to be interested in forest and fire management and its relationship to water supply. and land repurposing as strategies that we need to discuss more and fill out. So I think in our work, we will continue to work with those two topics and build strategies around those. We think there's some strategies and some ideas that are already underway and possibly something that the commission does not need to address. So better data for FIRO or forecast informed reservoir operation. If you are unfamiliar with that term, on our flood reservoirs, the dam and the water levels behind those dams are currently controlled by what we call a rule curve. And that's a curve that is developed based on our old hydrology that says during a certain time of year, you need to have a certain amount of space in your reservoir to allow for runoff and prevent flooding. But forecast informed reservoir operation changes that. It's reliant on forecasting. It would allow dam operators to release water in front of a storm to make room for water coming down from that storm, and more minutely or more actively kind of manage their reservoir levels so they're not dumping water when in fact we don't have any storms coming in and we're not sure we're going to get storms coming in. So that's what FIRO is about. Seasonal forecasting, we need to look at, we don't do seasonal and sub-seasonal forecasting very well. We don't have the technology. So if we were able to forecast farther ahead, that would help our management decisions. It would help forecast informed reservoir operation. So there are efforts afoot to improve our seasonal and sub-seasonal weather forecasting. Water recycling, I think the State Water Resources Control Board is doing more around water recycling. Desal has a question mark by it because the commission in previous meetings has expressed a lot of interest in desal and looking at that as a strategy that we might put forward. So I think the commission is still interested in that. So we may pick that up as another strategy to fill out and to flesh out. We do have a desal panel scheduled to come to the commission next month in our May meeting, I believe. So that topic is going to be discussed at the commission. And then there's some things here that are probably better tackled elsewhere. So we did talk in the working group about the state level drought plan. That may be handled in the California Water Plan as a better place rather than the commission. There is the Drought Resilience Interagency and Partners Collaborative. Now that group was started in response to SB 552. That is a standing group of folks, state and non-state folks, that will help. It's designed to help with thinking through drought preparation, drought response, and after actions of a drought. And so that group is just forming, but that is another place that will be focused on drought work. Inventorying the current drought efforts, that is something that you don't want to lose. I don't think we will lose that, but I think we want to make sure that that gets picked up and reincorporated as we move forward. And then protection of tribal, cultural, and ceremonial purposes, that is something we did have a tribe represented on our working group. And that is something that we feel will probably be embedded in all of the strategies, not separated out and moved as a strategy itself. So that's just a peek at where the commission is today with our strategies. I just wanted to give you that little heads up. I think at this point, I wanted to talk a little bit about legislation. I thought you, as the League of Women Voters, might be interested in what's floating around out there. Right now, there is a lot of bills. I think we're in that time of year when you're really in the house of origin where these bills are being written. They haven't come out of those houses to be traded to the other house, which will then look at them. So you see a lot of legislation at this point. I did not call out all of the bills for you here. I just pulled some, not because they're more important or better or anything like that. I just was quickly running through the list and said, oh, this sounds interesting. I'll pull that one up. So in the water management realm, there's 16 bills. AB 460 and SB 389 both have to do with the powers of the State Water Resources Control Board and what they can do in certain situations in drought to help manage. I just wanted to point that out because when you start playing with powers of an agency, people generally get interested in what that might look like. AB 1648 is, I thought this would be interesting because this legislation prohibits MWD and LADWP from making up Colorado River shortages through deliveries from other regions of the state. So no matter whether you live in the Central Valley or you live in Southern California, that may be of interest for folks. Water storage, there are 5 bills. AB 62 codifies the targets that I showed you for the California water supply strategy, that recycled water target and the storage target, and it puts those into law as targets that we will meet. SB 366 is looks at the water plan and asks the California water plan to establish a stakeholder advisory committee to plan how to meet water supply targets. And so that's just another piece of planning that's out there. Weather forecasting, there are 2 bills. They do similar things. They both create a group of folks, interagency group of folks that work to improve weather forecasting. So those 2 bills are out there. In CEQA, there's 4 bills. SB 651, that is to allow state water board and resources water, regional water quality control boards to prioritize water rights permits and other permits that they hold, things like water quality certifications, waste discharge requirements, to advance groundwater recharge. So I'm assuming that means that if they're looking at a project that advances groundwater recharge, then they would prioritize those permits for that project. Let's see, where are we? Flood, 4 bills. SB 23, state agencies expedite permits. This is similar, but it's looking at flood risk reduction projects. And so state agencies would expedite permits for water supply projects and flood risk reduction projects. In terms of sustainable groundwater management, there are 6 bills out there, but AB 779 has to do with adjudications. So that would be when a judge decides how the groundwater is divvied up, and that would take it out of the groundwater sustainability agency's hands. So it requires adjudicating courts to take into account needs of small farms and disadvantaged communities when entering into groundwater judgments. So that's what that bill is about. With that, I think I've taken you quickly through kind of the commission, changing hydrology, what some of the things are at the state level, what the commission is working on, and what may be out at the legislature. And that kind of sums up my talk today for you. This is my contact information. Please feel free to send me an email or contact me if you have questions. I'm gonna stop sharing my presentation at this point, and then I'll allow time for questions. Go, you are muted, Ann. We can't hear you.
There. Yeah, they did that automatically and I forgot. But one of the things that, I was curious about a couple of things in terms of the groundwater recharge. Do you designate places where it's appropriate to undertake that, or is that something that's left to local people? And I don't know, like with the San Fernando Valley, it's someplace up in the Northeast Valley that I think they look at using most for groundwater recharge, but I'm really not sure.
So there's a lot of layers to that question. The state through the SIGMO office, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office, has done, and I don't know if you've seen this, the aerial flyovers with the helicopter and the big probe that will help look at the density of the subsurface and identify areas that are better for recharge. So in that way, the state provides data for folks to use. There is a connection between groundwater sustainability plans, I believe, and local development plans. And so that's the local connection to kind of to say if a groundwater sustainability agency, identifies some of these recharge areas, should when we look at developing our local plans, protect those areas for recharge. I think that's the hope there. But I think the short answer to your question is it's locals who will decide where they can recharge and where we should recharge. I think there will also be large efforts from the universities and things like that to identify areas that are most effective in recharge. So there's a lot of layers to your question, but that's most projects have a heavy local component in decision making in terms of where that project goes and how it gets developed.
Then another thing, when you mentioned the different water storage projects, and you said 2 were above ground and the rest were underground. Was that recharge, or was that actually building underground storage in some way?
The 4, it's 3 and 4. So the 4 groundwater projects, they're typically banks, groundwater banks. So they would take water, specific water, and then recharge and put that in the ground, either through recharge basins or the word escapes me. Using a well in reverse, right? I can't remember what the technical term is. But anyway, they would do that, and then they would store that water and then pump it out during dry periods. So the folks in Southern California typically would be servicing folks in Southern California with that water. The surface storage projects are, I think it's Sites Reservoir. That's a new reservoir. Los Vaqueros expansion of an existing reservoir in Pacheco, which is an expansion and a rebuilding of a dam in the Bay Area. So those are the kinds of projects that I was talking about.
Okay, we have a question in the chat. It says, what is the Water Commission assessment and plan for when the aquifer use will be limited to water recharge?
Well, let me check the chat, and I can probably read that question for myself.
Okay.
So I don't think the Water Commission has an assessment and a plan for when the aquifer use will be limited to groundwater recharge. I think that groundwater sustainability agencies are the agencies in charge of basin management. And so the commission as a body doesn't have a role in per se in basin management like that. So that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's the first response I'll give. If I can clarify that all, I'm happy to do so. If there's a follow on.
Well, another question about underground storage. Here in Los Angeles, we know that there is this work on a rather large underground reservoir, essentially, near Griffith Park, which has been under construction for, I think, at least 10 years. I don't know. Are you familiar with that? And is that something that's happening in other parts of the state?
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that project specifically, but I know that there are projects afoot around building some kind of groundwater storage, some kind of recharge facility, and then they can do it under parks or under recreation facilities. I know in my town, they use some of the flood detention basins that would hold back floodwaters for soccer fields and things like that. So I think there are similar projects out there. So they're not unusual, but I think we'll probably be seeing more of those kinds of projects.
Well, I guess this is LADWP, and I don't know if how they're financing it exactly. It's supposed to be up and functional, I think, next year, but they had a lot of problems because this, as I understand it, it's actually a concrete structure, a bill that's really an underground reservoir, and it was it really was delayed a lot because it goes under the 101 freeway, and apparently Caltrans was a little bit nervous about it or something. I'm not really sure, but that was something that was, I mean, I'd driven past all this construction for a long time, but I didn't even know what it was until very recently. I think it's supposed to open next year. I mean, it'll be in use next year.
Just so folks know, I did stick my email address in the chat. Would you also like me to put the Water Commission URL in the chat?
Sure. So I guess, as I remember, and my memory may be faulty, but after we had an El Nino year and sometime in the 90s, I guess, when all that stuff dried up, then we also had an exceptional fire year that, because there was more stuff to dry up and burn. Is that something that we may expect this year after this very wet winter?
Yeah, I mean, where fire season is concerned, right? Fire season is turning into all year, and so when we get wet seasons that we haven't had, I don't know how everybody's yard is looking at your house, but when I look out the window, the weeds are having a heyday. So there is a lot of, I think, fuel that will be developed, and so if it does get hot and dry this summer, you will have a fuel issue in terms of and fire risk with that. I think that's one of the cycles that we get ourselves into.
I'm going to read this from Joyce. She said, at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned looking at places where drought has been managed well, and she wanted to know, where are they?
Well, I was referring to some of the countries that have experienced big droughts. So we did talk with Israel as more of an arid country and what they do. We talked to Australia. They went through the millennium drought, changed the way that they manage water. We talked with Chile, who I think is in the middle of, in a 13-year drought. And we wanted to talk to folks in Cape Town, South Africa, because they were in their big drought, they were the ones that were, counting down to the day when they wouldn't have water, right? We've run out of water. And so it's talking with those countries. I think countries and places that have survived through drought, or we were interested in, just to see what kinds of things they put into play, how fast they could put them into play. Certainly those areas are not America, they're not California, and politics and water rights play a role in how we do all that. So yeah, that's what I was referring to.
And Sue had a question that is there a plan for Tulare Lake?
A plan for Tulare Lake. I think the right answer for that one is there's a lot of local agencies and state agencies and federal agencies now involved in flood fighting efforts around Tulare Lake. I think decisions that they make will be, at this point, health and safety concerns, and look at that whole 4-county area as they try to figure out solutions. I don't know what the longer term picture is and thoughts are around Tulare Lake, if that's where the question is going. But I think everything right now is focused on the more shorter term issues that are presented. I think the last time Tulare Lake appeared, it was like 83, 82, something like that. So it's been a while. And if this kind of new hydrology plays into how often it might appear, I can imagine people wondering what the longer term picture is. But I think right now everything is in the shorter term, more immediate picture.
And I missed a question that Sue had in the chat earlier, which is essentially how powerful or influential is the farm lobby and big ag in determining how water is distributed?
Well, I mean, it's not small, right? I mean, ag uses, when you look at the gross water usage across sectors, ag still uses the most, right? And so the folks that use the most water and certainly have a foothold in the business that they do, they are influential, and they can throw their weight around. I still think that ag is faced with just being in that place of saying, of trying to figure out what should be grown, how it will be grown. I mean, there's a lot of estimates out there when you look at sustainable groundwater management and you look at the sustainable groundwater management laws about how much fallowing may have to occur to accommodate and make groundwater management sustainable. And that puts the farm folks and ag in that place of saying, how do we manage in this picture? How do we, if groundwater sustainability agencies tell us to cut back, how do we do that? What are we going to grow? So there will be choices to make. Those, I think, will be done at the local level. And so that one strategy that I had up there that I think the commission is still interested in, it said land repurposing. And part of that is trying to look at, well, what's going to happen if ag disappears? What is the better use, or how can farmers look at varying what they do and using the land differently, repurpose the land so it's not such a huge economic loss, and we can still have ag continue in California. So that, that's some of what that's about.
Okay, and there's another question in from George in the chat, which since I botched reading his question the last time, could I ask you to look at it?
Okay. Is the California Water Commission involved in both water supply and water need issues? If agriculture water need increases strongly after groundwater use is stabilized, why doesn't this affect water supply plans? So the Water Commission is looking at water management issues, both supply issues and I would say demand issues, if that's how I could phrase that. If agriculture water need increases strongly after groundwater, I think one of the pieces to your question, George, is that groundwater sustainability agencies are charged with management of the basin. And so they're the ones that set the limits of what can be pumped. So even if agricultural water need, quote, increases, I think the answer there is that they would be limited to the amount of water that they could use. So they would then be in the position of saying, how do I change my business to match what water I can actually use now? I think that's how I would answer that question.
And another question for me. The California aqueduct, are there any plans to change that at all? I know when you mentioned how the evaporative effect has been increased so much, is there any plan that to cover that or protect it from pollution and just general evaporation?
I think there's always, I don't know what the plans are, but there are projects out there with those thoughts in mind. I don't know if you saw recently, I think it wasn't the state water project, but I think it was a water district in Modesto or Merced that launched a pilot project to put solar panels over their canals to see how much evaporative loss that they could limit. I think those kinds of solutions and thoughts are out there. With the major pieces of infrastructure that we have in the state, like the state water project, the Delta Mendota Canal, Bryant Kern Canal, they're aging infrastructure, so they are older, and they have subsidence issues. So we know that there are problems that are existing, and I think there's always the eye towards how do we fix some of those issues, and there are repair projects in place to do some of the subsidence fix work, so we have the capacity to move water. I think the next step, and I think that DWR is well aware of this, is how do we make our infrastructure, those pieces of conveyance, more flexible? Because I think we're going to have to ask them to do things that they're not designed for, and so I think those thoughts and those pieces are out there. I don't know of any specific projects though that I could point to say this is what is happening in that area.
I don't know if you get involved with any particular city. I mean, we're down here and most of us are under DWP's regimen, but it seems though that I saw someplace that of the the lucky atmospheric rivers that we got, 80% of that went straight out to the ocean on our concrete LA River parts of it. And I was just wondering if you encouraged or participated in any activities that would encourage that to be used for recharge, or, however things go like that.
I have not. I think that we just actually had somebody from LADWP come in and show us how much they did recharge. They actually did recharge quite a bit. I can pull that stuff up and send it to you, and you can watch that kind of stuff on recorded commission meetings. I think the way the commission operates, it's really at more of the state level than the local level. Certainly within the water storage investment program, I am working with locals because they have the projects that we're working on. But when we look at water management issues, a lot of that is at the state level. So I don't have a lot of capacity, and the commission doesn't have a lot of capacity to, let's say, call up LADWP and say, can you recharge more of that? But I was very impressed by the amount of recharge they did do during the season. I don't know how much went out to the ocean, so you could be correct, but they did recharge quite a bit of water. It's pretty impressive.
How do you get much help or cooperation or money from the federal government?
I do not have any federal funding. I think the federal funding that is coming into California, I think the administration tries to coordinate and work with all that. I'm not, the commission itself is not involved in that. What was the other question? Do we get any funding? What was the other
or just, is there any cooperative projects with the federal government?
Well, there are always cooperative projects with the federal government because we have the two main water systems. One is federal, the Central Valley Project, and one is the State Water Project, and that's run by DWR. Those are run in a highly coordinated fashion, so we're always doing cooperative things. And I think the federal government, through the infrastructure funding that they've put forward, is trying to be cooperative and how we do things out here. So I do think there's an amount of cooperation with the federal government. It doesn't come through the commission.
And I know we're running out of time. I was just going to ask maybe one more question here. Is it, a lot of the recharge, it seems like, putting it in a place where it's going to purge down, gravitationally to other areas. But at least in Los Angeles, and I assume probably in other places, it also kind of pushes pollution on, groundwater pollution to further forward. And I was wondering how much of an impact that had in terms of deciding your recharge areas and how that works.
I think it has a huge impact on where we recharge and how we recharge. Even just looking at not just, but looking at the executive order that the governor released or governor wrote recently about recharge and trying to take floodwater and recharge it on working lands. There were restrictions in there about dairies or grazing areas because you don't want to put the water somewhere where you're going to mobilize contaminants and contaminate what you're recharging, right? Or contaminate the groundwater that receives it. So there's always, I think, there's always concern about that and water quality of recharged water and what you're recharging and what can you recharge. So that sometimes plays into if I'm recharging treated wastewater, how much treated wastewater and what are the residual chemicals in that, because when they go underground, you can form other chemicals that you don't want. So there's always sensitivity to what is being recharged, how we recharge it, where we recharge it, to not create problems that we would regret later.
Okay, and unless somebody else has other questions. It says, are there facilities to clean up water for recharging?
Well, I believe Orange County has one of the largest recycled water recharge operations around that. I mean, I think when in my younger days, when I was working in the financial assistance branch, we helped fund something there for Orange County Water District. It was a very large, and they were taking recycled water, so water that you would clean up, wastewater, and recharge it into the ground. And that was really, I think, around trying to limit seawater intrusion. So yeah, there are facilities that do that. If you're in the Ontario area, they do a lot with groundwater quality cleanup. They've got salt issues in the groundwater. They cannot let any of that water go to the Santa Ana River. So they are constantly doing resalting, desalting, and recharging cleaner water. So there are facilities out there depending on what your specific situation is to clean up water for recharging.
Or after it's pumped up. Yeah.
Well,
Okay,
or before it goes in.
Yeah, okay. Also, I guess I just really wanted to thank you today. I think we have gone over our time limit here, and so I appreciate you for running a little bit late with us. And we will